Hello, I'm Kriff,
And I'm Salamander.
and this is the State of the Mist podcast. We're bringing to you a new episode, and we do have a special guest on this episode.
So, hi everybody, I'm Grimaldi. I'm the guild leader of Blood Pact, and thank you guys for having me today.
Happy to have you.
Yeah, glad to have you. It's interesting with as many users we've been playing, and we really haven't interacted that much. I don't think we've been linked really or on the same server much, so should be some different points of view, different World vs. World experiences to talk about.
Yeah, I don't even think, have we been on comms maybe more than once?
I was thinking about that, and I don't think it's been more than once, if that even. I mean, we've had
If
some
that even,
mixed discussions, yeah.
No, I think you're 100% correct. Yeah, Fate has not put us on the same server.
Yeah, so I mean, the listeners / watchers know us fairly well, but if you can just give a short kind of rundown of your World vs. World, I guess, background, like a 5-minute blurb.
Oh my. So yeah, we've been playing since beta, played many games, but Guild Wars 2 is where we've been for over a decade now. The game has definitely evolved, we've evolved with it. Originally, believe it or not, I was the server leader for Dragonbrand for many years, but I was also server leader at different various points with SOS, TC, Borderless Pass. If we'd taken servers, what we would do is we would take servers from like tier 4, tier 5, and we'd actually build them from scratch as a challenge, and we'd bring it to tier 1 and then try to win tier 1, and then we would start and do it again because, the game just, you have to create your own fun. That's kind of the beauty of World v. World. Some people like that, other people don't. But yeah, so imagine many years as server leader, alliance leader, building servers, building groups. We were one of the first groups, even, like I said, creating war chests, hundreds of thousands of gold, transferring groups to make sure we had coverage. We actually were the ones that were responsible for changing the way they do server population count. Because believe it or not, PvE players actually counted towards the total. And we got to tier 1 and we won tier 1. Blackgate at the time, it was an arms race and everybody's getting more and more guilds, but our server was closed because we had so many Taiwanese players who were PvE oriented because of the server. So we got locked out. We were stuck in tier 1 for over 2 months. I think we had like a 100-page post and it was funny. And anyway, we moved to Henja Den Rabi and we were a server leader there. And after that, they actually opened up the servers, believe it or not. And then we were traditionally like a PPT guild. Like I said, we were just talking about it. Literally, we had coverage from OCX to EU. We had Southeast Asian. We had multiple drivers. We pretty much had coverage 24/7, 6 days a week. We're several hundred persons strong, about 500. We were very serious competitive. We've done this in many games. But that's just a little bit of background. Now, I would argue at this point, anybody who's playing, we're really just playing for fights. We still love PPT. We love fighting over structures and things like that. But at this point, I think it's just the combat system. There's just no game like it. So you'll see us out there. We typically raid 7 to 9, 7:30, 9:30, about 4 or 5 days a week. Typically, like I said, you'll see us, out there. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me, our guild, what we've done. We've been very successful. Like I said, we've taken Borderless Pass from tier 4 to tier 1. We broke Blackgate. We were the first guild to beat Blackgate during their last, reign, if you will. We took Ala Janther in the beginning, brought it to tier 1, but we weren't able to beat Henja Den Rabi, which was the best guild at the best server at the time in the beginning of the game. So like I said, we've taken about 3 or 4 different servers now from the bottom, brought it to the top, won tier 1. It was something that we really, it was a real proud accomplishment for us, just because that's the biggest challenge you could do back in the day. Basically, take something from the bottom, build it yourself, bring in all those like-minded people, different guilds, coverages, get everybody to work together as a group, and then actually, go to the top and win and be literally the best server in the game. Back when it had a little bit more meaning. But anyway, that's just who we are. If that gives a little bit of context.
That's awesome, and I didn't know any of that about you, so that's really good background. And honestly, that's not too often that people even talk about having any kind of PPT history at all. They just pretend like they never were PPTers, so that's good.
No, I mean, I would tell you, and this is a controversial hot take, I think PPT is the game. For some reason, I think we've conflated PPT with PVD, which I don't think are the same thing. If you want to get in a train and get your karma, and I respect that, I guess, if you're trying to get your tickets, but taking a defended keep or structure, the different vantage points, be able to be creative with the bridges, the elevation, the staircases, just the chaos, and just having to think on your feet, utilize all the different mechanics in the game. I mean, that's what makes it so much more fun than just you and I just sitting at South Camp and just kind of duking it out. I think when you get all those other things at your disposal, it's just there's no game like it. Problem is, I don't know if everybody, is dropping trebs, at South Camp behind the houses over in the corner, or, over at Northeast Camp and trebbing the towers, or like before, believe it or not, we would all sit in a room with a map and we memorized every single siege point. We knew every way to get in. It was like a point of pride, right? To just like, how could you put on like the best golem rush? Like we got to a point where we could flip a whole map in like 6 minutes, 8 minutes if people weren't paying attention. And then believe it or not, and I know Indo doesn't want to talk about it, but he was PPT as well. I mean, back in the day, they had the boom room on SOR. You had everybody together where literally like you had people that were being paid with bags, with gold, and they were literally like, we'll call them professional scouts. And they would literally, we'd get the whole map and you'd rally the map, because guess what? If you didn't defend your structures, literally within 8 minutes, you could port golems. If you chained it with about 4 mesmers and you had everything pre-built, you'd keep them at spawn. You would intentionally hit a different map, port back to another map, and before you know it, the whole thing turns. People had to defend, and they defended with tenacity, and it was really cool. They knew every arrow card, every pool. Like Doc is a great example. He's been around since the beginning. He knows how to defend. You don't have to like his style of play, but he understands a lot of those mechanics. And anyway, you're not going to see a lot of that anymore, I don't think, at least competitive PPT. That's a conversation I guess, you and I have talked on, which is, I think Roy is trying to move us back to a place where winning the matchup matters. I don't think we're there yet. I think like even winning the link, I don't think it matters yet. I think that a lot of the groups who used to really care, they don't play anymore. So I don't think you see that. I think most of the guilds who play anymore, it's more the combat system that keeps them engaged. But you tell me what you guys think. That's kind of where I am 10 years later, if you will, from release.
That's a really good take on kind of the evolution of people's play goals. And you're right. It actually, all this stuff you're saying about PPTing a server up to tier 1 and all that is super nostalgic for me, because I was less active during that time, but just learning World vs. World and being an angry pug refusing to join comms and stuff. And yeah, golem rushes and super organized, multiple groups hitting multiple things, and actually scouts that were doing their job. It's kind of not like that anymore. And it's not even where we're structuring. Like that was dying off long before that.
Yeah, because those who are left, and I'm one of them. You and I are still here and we're talking about it. Is the combat system is just so amazing, so good. There's just nothing like it where you can have that many people fight. I know we complain about the lag and reset knife, but by and large, I can't think of any game with the level, like this combat system was truly built for large scale RVR. And if you go play Elder Scrolls, or we're going to see what Ashes of Creation does, right? Like we're going to see what some of these other games coming down the pike. The combats, like even New World, if anybody played New World and did the 50s, like we did, and we were really competitive. We had multiple cities. We were the first guild in NA to even take down the raid in New World. It's a great game, but the combat system is great on the individual level. It's horrible on large scale. The way the fields work, the combos, the way the classes synergize, the diversity of classes typically in the meta, there's nothing like it. That to me is what pulls, keeps you here in this game. But I digress.
No, you're totally right. The combat system is one of a kind, and I've been surprised over and over when games have come out like New World and Elder Scrolls and stuff, and people go for 2 weeks and then they come right back. It's just nobody can really build something of this type of a game mode anywhere else.
And what's a shame is people don't understand there was no PvE when this game went live. There were no fractals. There were no raid dungeons. It was based on World v. World. There was a gentleman named Mike O'Brien, and if you look at his history and where he came from and Dark Age of Camelot and all that, This game was 100% world versus world. And the issue was they were really struggling to monetize it, which is crazy to me. I wish they, I'm sure all of us would have worked for free to help them figure out ways to monetize it. It was clear that they started gravitating towards PvE because it was more lucrative for the company. And then you started to see that World v World started to atrophy, and there was a lack of investment. But that was the game. Like, this game wasn't built for rating. Remember, there's no we call it like the holy trinity, right? Like healer, tank, and DPS, and range versus melee DPS. And I used to be a filthy PvEer. This game, right, with the downstate mechanic and all that, it wasn't really built for rating, like traditional PvE rating. It was really built for what you and I do every day, or all three of us do every day. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know of any game. I mean, Ashes, great game, but I mean, we're going to see. I mean, it's only like Alpha 5,263 or whatever it is. But yeah. And then I know you and I are talking. I mean, you have some thoughts, I'm sure, in terms of just restructuring the state of the game, where it's going. I mean, do you feel these are positive steps? Do you feel like the game is, since June, it's really kind of improved or neutral, or maybe it's regressing a little bit?
That's the question. I mean, the forums think it's just the end of World vs. World as usual, but I think there's a lot of kind of generational turnover that people are not taking into account. And I mean, like you mentioned, like, you've changed play styles and moved on from one thing to another. And like, when we were starting World vs. World, there were already super badass fight guilds in existence that we couldn't touch. I mean, I don't, you probably remember better than I do, but I think it was an OS guild or something on NSP that we were all just like, oh my god, like they were gods and no one could even come close to their combat. And we would just do our PPT and call, and they would come help, and then they'd leave, and but they're long gone. I mean, there might be one or two players split up in other guilds now or whatever, and our guilds have moved from being more PPT oriented to now being more fight oriented. So it's probably just a natural evolution of the game over time, and people, learning new things. But I don't know what the answer is really, as far as replacing those hardcore PPT guilds that no longer really exist, because that's what it's about. I think you're right. I think that is what the game mode actually is, and it's missing something without that. That kind of brings it all together and gives more play styles a purpose.
Well, I would say to you, there's clearly an existential crisis, right? Because you can only go to the windmill so often. And there's something to be said when someone pushes you to be your best. And then I would also go back to what you said. I mean, I can tell you every original fight guild. I mean, from the beginning to the end. And first things first, is the quality of player in 2024 is way better than it was back then.
Right.
I mean, people don't even understand that. And two, but I would also say the ethos of the fight guild has changed. A fight guild back in the day, I will fight you anytime, anywhere. And I want to be on the server with no other fight guilds, so that way I could maximize the amount of awesome groups I get to fight and push myself to reach my potential. And now you see guys with alliance stacks stacking up with the best players, and then literally, bragging about beating a bunch of, people you picked up at Home Depot outside of SMC. And you're over there with a 40-man squad, maybe 20 core. And it's like, is that the most challenging fight you can find? And then the question is, why aren't you seeking out the most challenging fight? Because in a game where you create your own purpose, that should be, I think, paramount. And it's fascinating to me. Like, there used to be guilds like, Ag back in the day, not the new iterations or the last couple iterations, but like the original Ag. And we were allies with them back then in Jericho and whatnot. And then you had Syndictive, and you had a guild called Night Shift. And all three of them, they would never play on the same server with each other, ever. They would never do it because they want to fight each other. Because they want to be the best. They don't want to be the second best or the third best. They want to be the best. And then the difference was, too, there was definitely animosity towards PPT guilds. but I also think there was a mutualism, right, where you knew you needed them because without them, you wouldn't be able to get the fights in the first place. I mean, they're a clearly vital part of the ecosystem, and there had to be some form of harmony. And it goes back to what you said, Kriff, which is just like, okay, guys, like I can't beat this group. I have the humility to know that. I got to rotate off the map, and I'm going to make room for Ag or Night Shift or Syndictive or whomever, right, to come on and clear those guys out of Garrison. And the difference was they would go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if people are going to be as willing to defend structures, right? I don't. They do, but I mean, unless you disagree, I don't.
There's
I don't
a lot
know
of
if people care.
baggage. There's way more baggage than there was before. Than in terms of guilds having reasons to be spiteful and not do things or screw other guilds over, and that can mess with the whole team unity quite a bit, depending on how people are, matched up.
Well, and what's the repercussions, right? Because let's say you operate according to your own rational self-interest, and I respect that. You represent New, I represent Blood Pack. Makes sense. You're going to do what's best for your community. Makes complete sense, right? So you need to make sure that if somebody was to, like you said, engage in resentful or spiteful behavior, well, then they're cutting off their own nose, right? There needs to be some form of repercussion for that. If there's no repercussion, then they can act with impunity. And then you see it gets pretty toxic. It gets really toxic really quick. And then in 4 weeks, what's going to happen with a relink? Oh, we're just going to get mixed up again, And if we win the matchup, well, what's the repercussions if we lose? There really isn't any. So do you really care if they take your garrison? Do you care if they take your keep in EBG? Your tier 3 tower at Northeast Camp? You know what I mean? Like I think that's part of the issue is I think you can just not care.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't as many repercussions anymore, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And I don't know that there is really a good fix beyond putting everybody back to zero in a certain sense, and honestly, all new maps. Like that is the only way to kind of reset things in terms of, PPT knowledge that we were talking about, as well as a lot of positioning and just along with some solid rewards for a longer duration matchup, 2 months or whatever.
I think the
But
matchups right now are too short.
yeah.
I mean, going back to your initial top, so first things first, just duration of the link. Right now, you could be in tier 4, you can be tier 1. It seems quite arbitrary where the server gets put. And then you spend all relink getting to where you're supposed to be. And a lot of the fights become lopsided because you have some servers that are ghost towns, right? And then you have others that are so vibrant and there's just nonstop fights. And it's amazing. And the question is, how can we have more, continuity and consistency, right? In the week to week, not so much volatility week to week. I think we were in a matchup. Remember, we were just fighting you guys, and literally, you guys were the only people to fight on both servers. It's like, well, how does this help?
That was the worst matchup that has happened with algorithms since they started this system, for my team at least. I mean, maybe some of the others were balanced, but holy hell, man.
Was that the last link when you guys couldn't get onto any maps during NA?
This last one, just before this one, I mean, there were queue problems, but it was mainly talent problems. I'm not going to mention any guilds at all, but man, RKDR was consistently the worst, and the points were still going because people were just avoiding fights and capping camps nonstop, and so we were constantly moving up in tiers and even more out of our proper placement in the tiers, and it's just
weight class.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad matchups, but honestly, that's always been a problem because, even with the linking system, after relinks, people are thrown into random tiers. There's no MMR, no kind of, win-loss ratio on that new team, so they put them in literally randomly, and
I would
that
say
first
to
week's
you,
always bad.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, can an alliance get a score? And then can there be some composite score that's used in a cumulative total and compared to others, right? To create some semblance of, because the whole premise was you were supposed to take into account commanders. You were supposed to take into account, when commanders are playing and, activity at different times, right? Because you want balance. And then I thought what Roy was doing was fantastic, which was he basically started making the different skirmish periods relative to the activity of the player base, right? Where night capping is now worth less than NA prime. Okay, that's good, because now the server and the score, like you said, I think it's going to be more indicative of the actual population.
Yeah.
And before, imagine like 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. was worth the same as 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. When the population is maybe, a tenth of that, but yet the scoring is commensurate. I mean, does that really make sense? So I think it's very clear that Roy is moving in the right direction. I think he's clearly trying to make those changes. I think there has to be purpose, because right now I don't know if being in an alliance even makes sense, if I'm being honest. Initially, I was very rah-rah alliances. You know that. You guys were building and we were building. And then I kind of came to the conclusion, if I'm being very honest, I just came to the conclusion. I said, well, what does winning get you? And then the matchups are 4 weeks, and you start at the bottom of the barrel, or you start at the top of the barrel. It's completely no rhyme or reason. So you could get great fights in tier 4. You might get great fights in tier 1, and some weeks you might get nothing. So all you can really do is control your time zone whenever you raid, right? So at that point, once your map has a Q on it, you can't really impact your play anything beyond that. And then the one big thing that I've noticed, and you tell me if you guys agree or disagree, is I think when you're in larger alliances, it really restricts the talent pool that you can recruit from without creating animosity and bad blood within your alliance.
Absolutely.
That's a great point, and I think that's why we've honestly seen 3 or 4 alliances break up recently. Like, I kind of expected growing pains initially with the whole system and social strife and people having differing goals and stuff, but it's taken longer than I thought. Like, there were too many efforts to totally rebuild servers and have 10 guilds covering the same time zones or all the time zones, and it's actually working out a lot more where just 2 or 3 guilds with similar interests be allies, and not really in all the time zones. Like, that's actually something the devs have said that messes up the matchmaking. So the only thing is that there's social growing pains that are going on, so people are learning that they hate each other or they conflict with each other's recruiting in the same time zone. But also the algorithm is only half done, and they don't, as far as we know, account for literally anything but numbers. I guess they're starting to try to get time zone coverage, but because of artificial links with alliances, they can't do it half the time. In other words, if there's 2 C guilds and an OCX guild all in the same alliance,
I'm literally on the same server with TM and Dusk, and I love both. But imagine I rate 7 to 9, right? And they rate 7 to 9. So at that point, two of the you would argue you might have 40 to 60% of the total coverage of that time slot, literally in one guild. I mean, one server. And at that point, you're just like, hey, who's asleep at the wheel, when they're arranging this? It doesn't look like they're accounting for anything. And I just think that is what creates such poor matches where, like, you almost get frustrated because you're just like, hey, who do I have to work with? I have nobody. So I definitely agree with you. The 2 to 3 guild. I think everybody should have a buddy. I think you need a map partner. And not all guilds need map partners, right? We've talked about this. I mean, if we have time, we can touch on it. I know several other commanders have talked on this. Maybe they say 30 is ideal or 35 is ideal. There's large groups in the nuclear arms race of alliances of running 50-man squads, some even having overflow squads, where you have to have a buddy, because if you don't have enough people, man, it's going to be a really rough 2 hours out there.
Yeah.
And you've seen it. I mean, you know it. And it's not easy to in this meta with the damage capping, with some of the nerfs to different abilities, running force support or some semblance of force support or hybrid, it's really hard to zerg bust. It's not like it used to be. So, and going back to your initial point, the quality of player is better. You can make as many jokes about VIP as you like. You can make as many jokes about, any 50-man group. But pound for pound, if everybody's on comms, running meta, and has parsers, over time, that 50-man group is going to be at least average. And if you're running 25 amazing players trying to fight 50 good players, in the current meta of this game, it is so hard to break that. It's not like it used to be. And I think a lot of people yearn for those days, that zerg busting day.
Yeah.
But I don't know how real that is. I mean, the other day, we were fighting. It was like, am I allowed to say who we're fighting, or should I not say any of those things?
We'll try not to talk badly of any guilds, just to not have problems. But
Perfect.
yeah, maybe not at all. Yeah.
Yeah. No. By the way, whoever listens to this, I don't mean anything negative. I have no negative intention with what I'm saying. We were fighting like it was like Knight and Sus, which they're good people. They're running. I think the parser was showing about 52 total, 53. We had 27, and if we try to fight them straight up, we couldn't beat them. But then if I could use terrain, use staircases, create choke points, keep constant movement, we could win. We could win. And my point is, like, that was really satisfying for us as a group, because like, wow, it's almost literally twice our numbers. And it was so hard. It was so hard because of the meta. And I don't know what your opinion is. I know you and I chatted on it briefly, but it's not so easy to fight heavily outnumbered.
That's 100% what a lot of people have noticed. And
Yeah.
I mean, some of that is expectation of, the good old days, like you were talking about, where 25 could zerg bust 50, and you saw that a fair amount. Honestly, I think that was not great either. I think there's somewhere in the middle. You might be able to wipe, plus 10, plus 15 of your group, but plus 25 is a lot. Like, I mean, I know what the good old days looked like, but coming in as a new player and seeing that, it's not a good look. Like, there's the player effort and the experience and tactics should be rewarded, but I think they were right in toning it down a bit. They just went too far. The smaller groups are not happy with how the meta is, but there's definitely a middle ground somewhere. The main thing you see people talking about is we need more boon rips and less reflects and less pulls. Some people talk about we need to change the damage cap or AoE cap so it can just hit unlimited people again. I think that one's overkill. I mean,
That would be insane.
some people talk about body blocking. Like there's a lot of that would be interesting to see. I don't know if the game engine could handle it, but yeah, I think there is a big problem with the meta, and it's not helping the smaller groups. That's being exacerbated by easy stacking. So it's a couple things.
Yeah, you're right that there should definitely be a balance. I don't think a group of 25 should be able to one push a group of 50 every single time. Like Grimaldi was saying, finding the right choke points, positioning properly, and all of those things come into play. And with the right players, it should be able to be done. For example, my guild, if we're running closed, we're lucky if we pull 12 people. There are times where we'd be able to break groups of 25 to 30, but that is incredibly rare. So we set out these small goals, like if we're able to take out 5, a group that's 3 times our size should not allow a group of 4 to 7 to kill 5 of their players. But getting nearly a full wipe on an enemy group like that is almost impossible now. And like you're saying, there should definitely be a balance. But there are some things where I think it should be harder for mega blob groups to just one push everyone on the map.
Well, so maybe my take's controversial. So one is, I don't know how much the game is making it the case, or just it's also 10 plus years old, and it's like if you play World of Warcraft, right? Every raid, every quest, there's a 10-page guide on it. And there's just so much knowledge, right, the community is so knowledgeable and there's so many great tools out there, right? I mean, shout out to all these guys who have built just amazing parsers where they take all that aggregate raw data and turn it into great visualization tools. For you, literally, if you have a 50-man group, like back in the day, remember, you had to literally watch footage of your players to see what they were clicking, right? To be like, okay, like, let me analyze your play. Let's see how you're moving. Let's see this. Let's see that. Let's use shadow play. Let's, use OBS, right? And that's time consuming, right? It was literally like being in high school sports or, like you were putting in a lot of time watching footage, trying to get better. Now, literally within 10 minutes of my raid being over, I could literally benchmark my entire group. Nobody can hide, right? I mean, there's some really great studies in terms of effort and like organizational behavior about effort, where like if Kriff and I are going against each other in a tug of war and everybody's watching, what you find is when it's 1 versus 1, you give 120% effort. You give so much effort, you actually could hurt yourself because because of fear or embarrassment, because people can recognize that if Kriff loses, Kriff lost. And as soon as you add another person behind Kriff, he's only going to give about 100%. By the third person, it drops to 80. By the fifth person, it drops to 30 to 25% effort. Meaning that the more people involved, the less likely you're going to see someone give 100% effort because they can hide within the numbers. It's great. Like a great case study would be like, let's say you go watch a restaurant and you see how you can see like the chefs and you can see them cooking, and it creates accountability, creates transparency. The parsers and the logs created unbelievable scrutiny on the wider group to create accountability that just previously it never existed. It just did not exist. So now you can see not just one firebrand, all your firebrands. What was their stab up time? What was their protection look like? What was their aegis? Hey, how much resistance did you rock? What was your interrupts, right? Before, oh, look at his dodge total, right? Okay, yeah, you did not have those tools. With those tools, you can make a 50-man group pretty darn good. And they may not be pound for pound tactically better than that 20-man group, but they're sure good enough that it's really, really hard to break them. I just think the game's at a different place. I think the tools are different. The knowledge is different. I do think the meta is, this is where Kriff and I disagree. I love the meta. I think the meta is awesome right now. I think that there's just a diversity of classes. There is a lot of creativity. I still think a lot of groups aren't meta yet, and that's exciting too, right? Because that means there's so many new things to kind of uncover. I don't know if we're 100% meta. I think we're pretty darn close, personally. And that's awesome to me. We definitely run a little bit different, I think, and we could always talk on that. But yeah, I like the meta. I think the meta is really strong. I know some people think that until Firebrand's gone, they don't like the meta because it's just why is it Firebrand for 8 years in a row? But outside of that, like I think the game's in a healthy place. I think there were some issues with like distortion and indestructible clones. I mean, the amount of lag that it was causing, you still starting to see some of that. I think getting rid of that. I think, watching people drop sentry turrets to, target cap people for free. I mean, obviously that's clearly an exploitable issue, and they addressed it pretty fast. I think that, the minions and whatnot, obviously Rise Reaper, like, guilty of it, right? Did we use it? But were we using it for the damage capping? No, we were using it for like the Poison Nova, the Poison applications. Yeah, I think the game's in a great spot. I think the combat's in a fantastic spot. I think the bigger issue is what do smaller groups do to fight the nuclear arms race? Because I think your point is, okay, then you build an alliance deck. But then if you build the alliance deck, you can fight the 50-man group. But man, how do you replenish your ranks? Because you as a guild leader, you know that better than anybody. There's a natural attrition, right? There's a natural attrition that happens to your roster. And a lot of leaders have talked about it. It's like, okay, how many active players do I need to add each month to maintain my roster size? And then the question is, okay, where do I find them? And those are some of the challenges as a guild leader, right? That you deal with, I'm sure, Kriff, right, on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean that's always been a factor of considering your recruiting pool. And yeah, I mean what we were talking about originally, where being an alliance can actually reduce the amount of players you can recruit from, so you don't recruit anything. And yeah, I mean that is a big problem. You do have to continually recruit, or naturally over time you lose players as people, move on to other games or just get tired of it or whatever life might have.
One thing
Yeah,
I'd like
it's
to raise about recruitment is using tools like the NA Alliance server helps, but one thing I've noticed is a lot of the people who reach out to me and end up joining the guild and setting our Alliance guild as their world versus world guild, they'll end up finding other guilds to play with long before the link is up and they're able to join ours. It's happened maybe 4 or 5 times since the alliance started with, and these aren't just 4 or 5 individuals. It would be like batches. Like someone would say, "Oh, me and 4 friends are looking for a guild," and those 4 friends would be on a different link for or a different shard for 4 weeks, and then find another guild to play with, and that's something I've come across pretty frequently. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is just us having to adjust how we recruit and maybe only recruiting the last week of the link or only recruiting on the same world. I mean, I guess you do want to recruit wider, but I know what you mean. I've had several guild leaders tell me they've missed out on people because of that month-long delay sometimes where you can't get those people in with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's all. So full disclosure, I mean, I went on a break. Back in April, May. And one of the main impetuses I came back, the timing that I came back, truthfully, was because of alliances that if you didn't, all your players are locked out for 4 weeks. And there's a gentleman, his name's El Cid. He just came back, really cool, old commander, great guy. He's a guild leader of TBT. And similar issue where he came back, but a lot of his guys couldn't play with him for basically over a link because they're locked out. There's no recourse. But part of me thinks that's kind of a necessary evil that you need to have because you need stability and continuity, right? You got to get rid of some of this volatility because the server volatility and the server transferring, which remember, go back to what we were talking about, like how do they generate revenue from World v World?
Yeah.
And the reality was server transfers was clearly a way that there was an economic incentive to allow server transfers. But inherently, while it does create revenue for the company, long term, it undermines the stability of World v World, which I would argue is bad for the game mode because the more disproportionate and unbalanced the server are, then the less competitive the matchups are. And the less competitive the matchups are, well, guess what? Then they're not as enjoyable, right? There's a reason why if you watch football, right, that the way whoever wins the Super Bowl is the one who gets the last pick and whoever did the worst gets the first pick. What are they trying to maintain within the organization? Parity. They want parity because the more competitive the fights are, guess what? The more people are going to want to participate. Server transfers clearly undermined that. The hope is with the relinks it would balance it, but I go to like Kriff's point, which is I'm not sure what they're normalizing for. What attributes are they truly selecting for when they create these servers? Because I'm not really seeing it.
It's not enough variables, and hopefully they're learning and adding things as they go. I don't know if they are yet. They haven't really said anything about the progress. Really, they're going to throw us maybe some UI or something soon, but the actual algorithm, if it's only accounting for player numbers, we need more. If it's now accounting for time zone coverage a little bit, okay, good. Half of that is we don't have enough alpha hours guilds, so I know it's not going to ever be great, but really, really, really what I don't think they've accounted for and we really need is accounting for tags and guild KDR. If they can track guild KDR and make teams based off that, that is the one thing that would really, really balance teams.
The problem you have, and this is more of like an edgy, new school last 5 years. Like 10 years ago, this was not an issue. Last 5 years is clearly an issue. I say it's an issue. I mean, obviously other people are gonna, Grim, you old man, is you have a lot of people that run tagless, right? Or they run meme tags and things like that. So even though like news running, there's 20 different tags in the stack, right? So the only thing I can think of is if they just look to see whatever tag you have, period, in your, in your panel, and they just associate your KDR to that, or something, something to that effect, right? You get what I'm saying? Because you have so many people who run tagless, you have some people who run troll kills, you have some people who run meme kills, right? And how can you have some form of data that is tied to that player? You get what I'm saying? On a collective basis.
I do, and I get what you say with the multiple people using multiple tags and stuff, but
And
I mean
multiple accounts.
well, that's something we can't really get around. That yeah,
No, I
all
agree.
world is, but I
No,
mean
I agree.
they just have to aggregate data based on people's war versus world guild, whether it's a guild or alliance. It doesn't really matter because that's what they're using for team making. So if my fight alliance has aggregate KDR of all our guilds of 0.5, which would be awful.
But irrespective of whether they're repping it, right? Like just hey,
Right.
if that's in their panel,
Yeah.
then whatever their KDR for that account is, I'm going to tie it to fight.
Right. And I mean, ideally, these alliances and guilds are getting smaller and smaller due to social and game pressures. But I mean, yeah, that's really the way to do it. I mean, you have one alliance per world or two. Hopefully, they have a similar KDR, and if they don't, you stick in other guilds with high KDR to balance them out. And you try not to have too many guilds with high KDR on the same world. Done. Balanced matchups. I mean, if you also consider time zone, that's really what we need. That alone, and adding some rewards, maybe giving people reasons to win, I think could bring it back to the glory days.
I think you have to create some semblance of purpose. I think you have to. I'm in agreement with you in terms of you have to have some form of elo tied to guilds and alliances. And then you have to give a reward for a high elo because you want players to be aligned with having one, right? And then I think if you do that, I think you can start to create balance. I think right now, I mean, you tell me, I go back to your last link, right? How many great map partners, like let's say you're fighting some really great groups, right? Some really skilled groups. You didn't have too many people you could call on, right? And that's really frustrating for your whole community, I would argue. Because then it's like, how many people I'll give you a great example. Let's say, and you see it, I think we've all seen this, right? Where I think some people will target other groups, which I think I'm not a big fan of it, if I'm being very frank about it. And it's like, what do you do to create parity? Because I don't know if logging off is the answer, right?
Yeah, ideally there's options to swap maps if queues are under control, but yeah, I mean, and honestly, some matchups just can't be even. Sometimes there's going to be bad ones, but if they can at least factor in some more variables, I think we can get better. I don't know what to do to give people a reason to care about winning points in PPT though. I think there has to be some drastic restructuring of the maps and rewards to get there, and maybe more static communities. But
well, what are your thoughts on? I mean, my thought would be, I'm rich, like let's start creating some titles, right? Let's start creating more skins. Let's start creating quality of life access things, right? Things that don't give you a pay to win advantage, but at least confer some semblance of social status. Maybe there's a leaderboard. Maybe there's where people can, get an opportunity to get recognition from their peer group, right? I mean, I think there's a myriad of ways that one could create ideas to incentivize performance.
That's super lacking, and it needs to be in-game tangible stuff. In-game tangible stuff to encourage guild recruitment. I liked back in Guild Wars 1, if you played it, there was some stuff where it was like Luxon versus Kurzik, and they would claim actual in-game PvE areas, and you would see like guilds claiming stuff in PvE towns, as far as I remember. If we had that in this game, that would be awesome. Like that would give some real, you can claim Lion's Arch, like that's huge bragging rights publicity stuff, and
Oh yeah.
there's no integration at all.
Well, remember, I mean, back in the day, right? Keeps didn't change hands so frequently. There were times where garrison didn't change an entire week because it was a point of pride to hold your garrison, right? Or your EBG keep. And you would claim it and you'd have your guild there. And that was like an amazing advertisement, right? Because not everybody could claim a garrison or an EBG keep or even SMC, right? Now it changes so quickly. I would argue it's been trivialized. You know what I mean? Like, does anyone in our guild take a lot of pride in claiming SMC?
It's whatever now. It's just a thing you do for supply. Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Like that level of significance is kind of gone. Because that's kind of like you're like, hey, look, like my flag's here, my banner's here, my guild name is plastered. Everybody, when you open the map, who do you see? You see new. It's right there. You can see it. And that was powerful. I mean, a lot better than copy pasting something in team chat every 10 minutes, you know.
I think we've just done it too many times. I mean, I think it's just not fresh, and that's why the new maps are needed so badly. Like that, we need some new stuff. Like the world restructuring is not really new stuff. If they can actually get around to actual content, then everybody will have to learn at the same time, and that will kind of drive things.
Well, imagine that. Then they got to start out allocating resources.
Yeah.
Right, and that's where you're seeing. No offense to developers or anything like that. Is like building maps and also balancing maps. Right. Like look at the desert map. Remember, I mean, maybe you remember this, but okay, when they first went live with the desert map, there was no alpine map left. Do you remember that? It was all desert maps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people were mad.
The game almost actually died. Like legitimately, it died. I don't know if you remember that, but
yeah, it was a lot of protest game breaks. Yeah.
And then eventually they said, okay, we'll give you back the Alpine, but they still left us one, even though nobody wanted it. And then what map does everybody play the least?
Yeah, there's problems with that map. Some people really like it, but yeah, I think people point at that too much though. Like they tried one thing, it didn't work great. That doesn't mean they can't make a good map. It just means those guys that made it that time, who probably don't work at 8N anymore, didn't do the right thing.
Yeah,
give more people a shot,
Well, yeah, no, I appreciate you guys even having me. I apologize. We talked about all sorts of things, tons of other things, and then but thank you guys again. It was a blast. I really appreciate it.
It was great having you. Thanks for coming on. We have to have a part 2.
Yeah, very great getting some different opinions on the show. Thanks for coming, Grimaldi, and yeah, this has been the State of the Mist podcast, and I'm Kriff.
I'm Salamander.
And make sure you guys like and subscribe and send us to your guilds and put any, comments in the comments, and we'll try to answer any questions.
All right, you guys take care.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. That was awesome. See ya.